Hello and welcome to another of In Dialogue Foundation's dialogue session of In Dialogue Foundation's certificate course in Dialogue Studies. Today we have with us Dr. Tarushikha Sarvesh. She will be talking to us on the topic of dialogue, democracy, and human rights. Dr. Sarvesh is Assistant Professor of Sociology in the Advanced Center for Women's Studies at Aligarh Muslim University. She specializes in development psychology. I'm so sorry for that. Development sociology, gender studies, multiple marginalities, and social exclusion. She focuses on caste and culture studies from a gender perspective. Currently, she is directing an ICSSR-funded project on people's lived experiences in Conflict Zone of Kashmir, with special reference to women and youth. She is also a co-investigator in a research project with funding approved of 7,350 New Zealand dollars from Massey University, titled The Outbreak of Online Education in the Growing Digital Economy and Digital Gender Divide Issues. From the period January 2021 to December 2021. Her areas of interest are cultural studies, gender studies, theories of justice, and development. She's been regularly contributing to various journals and books. She also often writes in popular media platforms such as Newsclick, Firstpost, The Wire, The Print, The India Forum, The Telegraph, and News 18. So, hello and welcome, Tarushikha. You have up to 2 hours. You can divide it as you like. You can continue for an hour, and then we can have an interactive session after that. It depends on how you would like it, and over to you now.
Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. I must add a little more to it. No.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
No. So thank you for joining, and I'm so happy to be here today because the topic itself and your institute, the theme itself, dialogue, because through dialogues, would anyone want to talk about it a little before I speak? Any of the participants? Like, what is your understanding of dialogue? Anybody? And then I will say why it's so, close to me, and I'm sentimental about dialogues. So anybody, your engagement with the idea of dialogue, if anybody would like to speak.
Anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand and then you can start.
So it's...
Okay, I'm going to say Pragya if there's nobody. Okay, Akanksha. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great.
Hello, ma'am. So for my fill the courses or whatever I have is the understanding it's not a debate, but it's not a win-win situation, but rather to understand each other's position and to develop you can put you into other shoes and understand their position while maintaining your identity as well. So for me, that's a very small understanding of dialogue.
No. That is dialogue, of course. That is dialogue. So and that's how we demarcate it from other forms of conversations and engagements, debates, and other such forms. Yeah. So yes, for me, dialogue has had two major takeaways. So one is that, of course, when you have dialogue with people, as you said, that it's a shared understanding, it's a shared inquiry, and it's a shared concern. So one is that, of course, and you get better insights, you get more perspectives on things when you engage in dialogues. Second, which was the byproduct for me, and whenever I engage with people in such a scenario. So what I understand is about the background, their life stories also, because I feel that when you're engaging with people, not from the standpoint of winning or losing, then you are vulnerable. We'll also see that in Socratic dialogue, and when we'll discuss Hannah Arendt and all that. So you also understand people's life stories. You also understand people's backgrounds. You also try to understand what the thought process that went behind it. So there are two things. So one is, of course, you get better insights into things. Secondly, you also get to know people much better, and you also get to know the stories of courage. So I feel having a dialogue, the first thing for me is having a dialogue is having courage. So people who have courage are able to indulge in dialogues. Otherwise, it turns into a debate, and then we end up seeing what happens on our TV screens. So dialogue needs courage. So from that, I'll start. And also, dialogue puts you in touch with your conscience. So you are also checking your own ideas. You are also investigating your own ideas and experiences. So dialogue also puts you in touch with your conscience. And we'll also discuss a few arguments that we keep hearing on a daily basis in our everyday life. For example, you're too argumentative, you argue too much. So arguments, debates, why don't you ever get satisfied? So these things, I'm sure all of us must be hearing a lot on a daily basis, that nothing satisfies you. What will satisfy you? Now what do you want? Why are you asking so many questions? So with asking questions and having arguments at times, and then also having healthy discussions, it's very important, because there the individuals are not important. The issue is important. The conversation gets the center stage. So from that, I'll start. I had shared a few readings. One was on the feminist perspectives on human rights. Another one was on ecological democracy. And one was on dialogue and discussion, reflections on a Socratic method. So why these three, and why I'm trying to conflate these two ideas of feminist perspectives on human rights and ecological democracy? Because both these ideas, feminist perspective, how they were engaging with the idea of human rights when it was being shaped and the declarations were being formulated, and what was going into the discussion. So what was happening over a period of time during the formulation of these rights, and how the declarations came about. So how feminist thinkers, how feminist movements, feminist concerns were interacting with the idea of human rights and democracy. So both these ecological democracy advocates and feminist rights advocates, they were interacting with similar ideas of liberal democracy and human rights. And they were trying to negotiate from different entry points. And they were also trying to, the resultant solutions were also different. And they were varying according to the background, according to the concerns. But why we can put these together? Because we can understand that there is a point of convergence regarding the obstacles and the hindrances that both these, strands of feminist engagement with human rights and democracy and ecological democracy, how it was having how it was interacting with these two ideas of democracy and rights. So we'll see that there is a convergence in terms of the obstacles that both were facing, and through that. But before that, so before engaging with these two, the feminist concerns and the ecological democracy advocates, we'll quickly take up the reflections on Socratic dialogic method. So I don't know if anyone has gone through these readings, but if You've gone through? Great, then we can have a better discussion, but otherwise also we'll have a good discussion. So here, yeah. So we have a few things. For example, there is this Kantian understanding that when there is a consensus, we can take it as truth. So one is that, but we're going beyond that. And in this reading, because I felt that this was the closest we can come to the Socratic dialogue, and it has covered all the phases, the structures of a dialogue. So we'll just purely take dialogue as the unit, and try to understand what goes into it, and how we can engage with it at a micro level, meso level, and macro level. So connecting the micro realities to the meta narratives, how it can be done, because later on when we'll see that how deliberative democracy was also struggling in dealing with these issues, because it was still following the framework of liberal democracy. So we'll see that, how when Chantal Mouffe, they brought in the idea of agnostic pluralism, how they were engaging with all these ideas. So the dialogue that was happening becomes important. So here, there are a few statements. For example, when somebody says everyone is entitled to their own opinion, we keep hearing that, whatever you are thinking, I am thinking, it's okay. You are right in your place, I am right in my place. Let's have peace. So what do you think about this kind of a conversation or statement that everyone is entitled to their opinion? How do you interpret it as? I can see a few names. Afnan?
I'm sorry, can the question be repeated?
Yeah, sure. Is that Kulsum?
Yes, I'm sorry. My camera is being a bit problematic. I'll figure it out.
So I was just saying that the statement, everyone is entitled to their opinion, right? We hear this statement quite a lot. So people say that, you're right, I'm also right. For my life, my methods are fine. For your life, your methods are fine. And we're doing good. And let's make peace with it. So what is your interpretation of this statement? How do you perceive this statement? What does it lead to? Is it an obstruction? Is it opening up the boundaries? What is it doing? Mona Lisa.
Okay, Pragya has a take. Pragya wanted to, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, Dr. Sarvesh, it's more of a pacifist statement. It probably comes when you're just tired and the dialogue is probably not happening at the, you don't see the other person opening up, or you yourself maybe not open, and then you just want to close it. It's a lid on the boiling pot.
Right. So when do we have it? Like, there are three circumstances where we can have these statements. One is to actually maintain peace and harmony, so that, okay, fine. Another is to avoid criticism sometimes. Yeah. But then it doesn't lead to anything. So this sort of an inquiry, we don't engage, we just stop, and we don't actually develop, we don't grow in our perspectives, we don't grow as, the human mind, the flesh and the brain is meant for thinking and engaging. It doesn't happen. Now the point is, why should it happen? If things are in order, and if it's not troubling us much, why should it happen? Do you think it's unnecessary? It's just human nature to have this sort of an exercise and indulge in this kind of an activity because we have leisure time? So why do you think, or do you think it's not required, or you think it is a must and we need to have such dialogues? So why is it important?
Because I'm so sorry, but Because all of us have different things that you'd like to, safeguard and defend and maybe, engage in a dialogue with other people for. You might like to do other things, but my interests would be different, could be different. Yeah.
Right. So also to counter prejudice, right? As you said,
that you are too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That too. Yeah, it's because if I don't understand you, if you don't understand me and my behavior, my methods, we will develop prejudice, and it will lead to chaos eventually. So to avoid that, and for our own existence and for our well-being and for everyone's well-being, we need to counter this. But then another point comes in here, so which is called relativism. Right? We are all familiar with this. So the moment we say cultures, the moment we say identities, and the whole idea of cultural relativism was ushered in to counter prejudice, to counter xenophobia, to counter ethnocentrism, to counter all these phobias related to the identity of the other. So the moment we say relativism, now I'll bring in two terms here, relativism and essentialism. Do you think these are polar opposite or they work in tandem? Relativism and essentialism. Relativism would have that element where what you're doing is fine, what I'm doing is fine. Though it came with a very noble idea to counter prejudice, but it has that little element somewhere. But essentialism is dangerous.
Everything works together. There has to be some things that everybody agrees on, I guess.
The social minimum, you feel?
Yes. So
maybe
it has to work with relativism in some ways. Yeah. So I think there might be opposites, but there might be opposites that work together.
Actually, these are opposites which work together. So you're right. These are opposites which actually work together. And we'll see in when we do that reading on feminist perspective on human rights, that how these arguments were developing, how people were very cautiously putting these arguments forward so that they don't fall into the trap of, again, the thinking where people are stuck in their identities, but they also want to break those identities while maintaining the personhood and the self of and the being of your existence. So these subtle arguments, we'll see that how within the feminist fold, how democratic debates were happening, dialogue was happening. So we'll see that. But before that, as I said, that we'll quickly, we took one point. So there is one term used here, which is called discourse of uncritical acceptance, the one which we were discussing, that, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, is called discourse of uncritical acceptance, that you are just accepting without any critical inquiry, and you just don't want to stretch it further. We keep hearing this mostly in our family setup that, okay, stop now, fine. And many times, especially for women, we get to hear a lot that, okay, fine, it's enough. But this is called, you are not engaging, you are uncritically accepting things. So this is a discourse. Another thing in Socratic dialogue, it's called that you cannot really teach, you cannot really say that you have learned something in a concrete fashion. You experience it. You experience it while it's happening. I think a few minutes ago, we were engaging in these ideas, and it was a continuous inquiry. So there are 2-3 forms where you aggressively ask questions and engage, and another one is develop critical thinking. So that can happen. So there are two ways of going on, asking questions and then leading to, the crux of it, or the sediment, whatever is remaining. We understand that core idea, okay, we need to build, I was coming to another word, consensus. So as we said that, in Kantian philosophy also, we hear this a lot, that consensus, if we have to build, if there's a consensus on something, then it has to be taken as truth. So what is your take on consensus? Consensus will lead to justice? Consensus can be democratic, or it's something else? Consensus. Many times we hear on public policies are also built on that on popular consensus, or on, we were able to have 100% consensus on this. So consensus will be just every time and democratic, or consensus can be undemocratic and unjust? It can be democratic, but may not be definitive in justice. All right. Okay.
I think consensus does have a democratic element to it for sure. It's a kind of democratic by definition, like Mona Lisa has said. But I think it depends on the pool on which you're drawing your consensus from. Is it including the people that it should be representing, that sort of thing?
Right. So absolutely. It totally depends, as you rightly said, on the pool of people that you're engaging with. So yes, it can have both the elements. So we have to be wary of it. We are not saying that consent. We don't have to arrive at a consensus, but we need to interrogate the grounds of the consensus, the way it has been achieved. You're right on that. So so in this, there are 5 structures of dialogue. One is to find participants, though what Plato has talked about, Socrates, that he used to go on the streets and meet people and start having dialogue. But then there is also another form where you can have a more structured dialogue, and there are 5 structures, getting the participants, sharing experiences. So sharing experiences and then selecting one experience and then arriving at a judgment. And actual dialogue begins when you get to that judgment part. So here experience takes the center stage, and it is said that it has to be, experience matters. So how many of you feel that experience matters? Because again, there are 2 philosophical debates around it. One group says that, a lived experience is okay, but you can also have a dialogue without having that lived experience. But there's one set of group, Puritans, who feel, no, without lived experience, you cannot indulge in a dialogue on a particular issue that affects particular people or a group of people. So how many of you feel that we can have these discussions without the lived experience? Okay. Mona Lisa is saying, I guess I'm a Puritan. Pardon, sorry?
Both are important. Like without lived experience and without having, they both have elements that can be joined, and then it could be a great outcome. If we go to extremes, it's not helpful at all.
Right. Can you give me an example? That let's say you give me an example. Take any issue. Let's see, or any issue that particularly has affected you, or you have watched it closely. Anything. I
can probably give an example.
Yes, please.
So, one of the things that I feel about is the LGBTQIA issue. So I do not belong to, but then, I think sometimes when you belong to a certain group, you are probably consumed by your identity. So you may not be able to have an objective view, but I see somebody, I feel somebody who can not without a lived experience can support, and I can probably explain it to somebody who also doesn't identify with the same group much more objectively than being overwhelmed by and feeling that it's coming at me.
Right. Great. Yes. One more example we can take, and then we'll get to it and discuss. One more example if we can get. No? Anybody?
Mohammed, do you want to try?
Mohammed?
नहीं ठीक है
बताएं मोहम्मद, कोई तो बात होगी ऐसी.
जस्ट मैंने ज्वाइन किया है तो अभी मैं समझ रहा हूँ.
अच्छा ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं है. तो मोहम्मद ने एक बड़ी अच्छी चीज कर दी है, that he has given us another point about bystanders. So because when people are यहाँ पे हमारे in our reading also we have this, that initially when people are wary of the discussion or of a particular issue, or they're not very sure, so they want to protect their their space, and because it is a vulnerable thing to do, because you're exposing your mind, you're exposing yourself. So that's what we have initially in every group. We'll have a few bystanders who gradually start participating once they gain confidence. So that's the best thing about dialogues, that it's not meant to expose anybody. It's not meant to, why I'm saying this argument, because a few days ago, I heard this argument. Somebody was saying that, if you're having foolish dialogue, then you expose yourself. Your foolishness gets exposed. I was like, no, you're not having a dialogue to expose anybody. You're just having a dialogue to get insights into certain things and issues. The purpose is not to expose anybody, and nobody should feel that way. So in the worst form, it can be, it can lead to bullying, it can lead to mockery. In the best form, it can lead to a healthy discussion in a closed group, a common sense of belongingness. So Mohammed, thank you. आपने कुछ नहीं कहकर भी कह दिया काफी कुछ. Acha. So Pragya, yes, on your thing, yes, of course, that people who don't have that identity, who don't even claim to understand it fully, because of course we cannot claim to understand anybody's identity, be it caste, a particular racial identity, or gender identities that we have, the whole spectrum of the gender identities, the sexualities we have. We cannot claim to understand them fully. We cannot claim, as you said, that, we might not have that lived experience. But whatever limited understanding we have, we're keen on learning, at least if we are sensitized in that area, in that zone. So with that sensitization and with that entry point of the willingness to do something, we can convince, or we can have a dialogue with others. So again, coming to a consensus is not the motive of any dialogue, but to have further dialogue, to gain better understanding. Sometimes what happens when I talk to groups who feel that they are being they are at the periphery, or they have suffered to the extent which people can't imagine. But they feel that when you're talking about them, or talking about a particular identity, they feel that if you're not aware of it fully, then you might hamper their cause. So that is also one concern, that if you are not aware about it, so it's also important to bring in the voices who have lived experience, also the voices who are at least sensitive enough to share that space with people who have lived experiences. So as Akanksha said, as Pragya said, that yes, we need a combination. Only lived experience, as you rightly said, will overwhelm you, and you'll feel that this is the only way to think, and that's the only perspective by which people should go. And not having lived experience will always have our limited understanding. So it's always important to engage, and always important to engage deeply in order to learn and go a little closer to that lived experience, because putting yourself in somebody's shoes is not always possible, but you can always understand. And whenever we're saying something, we can say it with that disclaimer, with that clause and caveat that, in our limited understanding. And of course, we can quote others. So it's very important while for writing papers, research papers, or for writing anything, it is said that, we should bring in more references from the people who have had lived experiences. So that's also a feminist methodology of, doing justice to people's rights by bringing them and in their references, and bringing those work in your work and involving and engaging, and at least mentioning them in the reference part of it, and quoting those very writers and authors who have had lived experiences. So yes, as you said, I'll quote a statement here on this, that why every time lived experiences won't help, and how they can also be slightly limiting in their approach. So I'll. It's considered that you need a healthy distance. You need to distance yourself from your actual experience that you are having, and you are embedded in that. So if you have the reading, it's on page 69. If you want to open the reading, it's here. So this distancing of some things and bridging the abysses to others is part of the dialogue of understanding, for whose purposes direct experience establishes too close a contact, and mere knowledge erects artificial barriers. So too close a contact and artificial barriers. So we need to find a bridge between the two, that you are too close to be unbiased, or you are too distant to be able to understand, and you're creating artificial barriers. So too close and too distant. So we need a bridge between the two. So here we go. But we have to be wary of those groups also who feel that lived experiences are the thing, and we need to have dialogue with them without, confrontationist approach. So this should always be open. The space of dialogue should always be open. Now we come to the idea of imagination, which Hannah Arendt brings in, that, why imagination? So she also says that, fine, we cannot always have lived experiences, and we cannot always get into others' shoes, but we can always have imagination. So what is imagination and what it does? It's just creative writing, creative thinking, something artistic. What is imagination for you? And when do you think it's applied in your everyday life the most? Mohammed Isbar, up.
Mohammed, please.
He's trying to imagine, I guess. Acha. Anybody?
Okay. Ruben?
I guess, in a lot of places we can use our imagination, but also in terms of our relating to other people, imagining how they are feeling, imagining how they are responding to our words, our actions. That is one area where we use imagination.
Right. Also, exactly that we try to imagine, but it is different from empathy. Hannah Arendt specifies it very clearly that, it is different from empathy. So now what do we do about it? We can't be empathetic because she says, and we know that only empathy will lead to sameness. What you're saying, I'm empathetic, I also say the same. Then what's the next step? Ruben, only if you want to take it forward.
Over to Kulsum.
Okay, Kulsum. Oh, yeah, she has raised her hand.
I think Ruben made a really good point about imagination, helping you relate to other people. And like you said, that's not empathy. So empathy would mean that I and the person I'm imagining about come from the same place. We have the same sort of lived experience. But I think what imagination helps us do is build a sense of compassion. So we can maybe, help a person or relate to them from our own point of view. So it's not exactly like a mirror image, but more of like a translation of one experience into another. I think that's what it helps in.
Right. Fine. Compassion, you said, right. Compassion, imagination can lead to compassion. Compassion can lead to better understanding. Compassion can lead to interest in other people's lives. Right. So the point is why we are saying and why Aaron is saying that empathy is a hindrance, because we feel that, one set of prejudice will be traded for another set of prejudice if it's just empathy without inquiry, without investigation. So if there's empathy, you won't inquire. You'll feel that you are actually doing injustice to the person by further inquiring. By further investigating the issue or the experience. So empathy will stop that inquiry, while compassion, yes, it won't stop the inquiry. It will make you interested in the person or in the reality of or realities of certain groups and experiences of certain regions, backgrounds. So yes, here there is another important idea of enlargement of mentality because of all these things, imagination and compassion. It leads to enlargement of your mind, enlargement of mentality, that we don't have a very skewed view of things or understanding of things, and we don't have a very narrow interpretation. Our interpretation can be broader, horizons can expand. So she uses a term called expansion of your mentality, or broadening or enlargement of your mentality. And then for empathy, as she says, that the exchange of one set of prejudice for another. Aaron's objection to what she calls empathy is the threat of sameness that we have discussed. Now she says that both Aaron and Socratic dialogue facilitator would welcome such diversity. It is through this plurality that we learn to be critical of not just the prejudices and traditions one inherits, but also our own. So, and that we come close to an understanding of a world that we share. So if there is only empathy, then again, the experience will be unidimensional. I will just take it at face value. What you're saying is, and I'll become your advocate. But then your experience will be unidimensional. My experience, because my own prejudices, maybe I'm empathetic to you because of my prejudices. So I'm not challenging myself. Neither am I challenging your ideas or your experiences. While when I'm saying challenge, it doesn't mean that I'm rejecting. I'm just trying to understand it better, the layers, the multi-dimensional aspect of realities that we have. And as Bell Hooks and other thinkers, Katie King, all these thinkers, they have established that why we need theories. Why we need theories? Yeah, let's take that up first. What's the use of theories? Because there's one set of group who says enough of theorizing. Let's be practical.
I think, they say truth is relative. And so like you said, every experience is not unidimensional. There's a multiplicity to everyone's lived reality, because no one person is just like
they have just like one set of traits and they're one person. Everybody has these different personalities with which through they interpret things. And then if you just have a sense of empathy towards them, you will never, first of all, it's very hard to have like full empathy with a person, because individual reality is so different from one person to another. So, I mean, I think theories exist because of that. Theories let you have maybe like a stab at the truth. You don't maybe arrive to a full answer, but it allows for everybody to have like a seat at the table, that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. That is one take. Absolutely. Anyone else? Mona Lisa has written something like the recipes, a foundational base from where we can rise to understand and then explore to build on our own broadening of understanding. Okay. Okay, fine. Mohammed, Ruben, anybody?
Man, theory give us like a direction to us, like because lots of thinker has given they think all that things about, like they with their own perspectives, and a person who not aware about that things, so who can take some direction for their theories and something. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, like what Kulsum said is also right, because we need different things to think about. And what Mohammed just said makes me think that it's a condensed version of that, that researchers or that academicians years in academia. Like when he said that, Noam Chomsky came to my mind. And when you read about his theories, it really makes you think so much. And it really makes you wonder how many years of experience and hard work went into, that thing that he's just stating in a really simplified way. So you don't have to make the same mistakes to be able to come up with that. You have to learn from other people's hard work as well.
True. So that is one. Of course, it gives us direction. It gives us perspective on things. It brings us closer to multiple realities that exist. One more thing it does, which Bell Hooks emphasizes on, which is very personal to everybody. And if you understand, and if there is something you're struggling with, for example, if there is an issue with your family, with friends, or with your colleagues or anybody, and if somebody tells you that this is what is happening in these places also, so do you feel a little better that it's not because you have done something wrong or you're not on the wrong? This is because of something else, maybe the structural problem. Do you feel this happens when the moment you realize it's not you? There's some problem with the institution. There's some problem with the idea, or there's some problem with the idea of right and wrong and how to behave. So you're not the culprit, but the culprit is somewhere else, and the culprit is invisible, which is a little frustrating because you cannot explain, but at least it relieves you, relaxes you a bit. You feel that? The moment you realize, and you're sulking and the whole day, and you're feeling very low, and suddenly when somebody tells you that no, that's not but other people's forms also got rejected because there was a problem with the internet of the university or of your organization or something, then do you feel a bit relieved? And when somebody says that, it's not just your complaint, but in all the universities of the world, our grievance redressal system is not that functional. So
I think
it makes you feel you're not alone.
Yes. So it has theories also have the healing power. That's what Bell Hooks says, because in her childhood also, she had a tough time with her father, in her family. And for a very long time, she kept feeling that, families are sacrosanct. And we also, especially in our zone in South Asia, we feel that families, you cannot utter a word against families. But we also see that families fall apart, families do things. We also have honor killings. We also have other things. So the moment somebody tells us, then our perspective, if not completely changes, but we do start thinking that, okay, these things happen. There are property issues. There are things that happen. And so sometimes we can share our experiences, and it's not that bad to share your experiences. Akanksha wants to say something.
Yeah, so in negative perspective, it's like, okay, healing power, but psychologically as human lives, so if we have some idea and we thought it's very unique to me, but then we find there are very similar ideas related that is exactly like mine. So it also sometimes very frustrating to us, like there are so many ideas already existing, so many theories. So I think there is both this.
True. But then it reaffirms that your idea is a good idea. Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
You can always use them as references that 10 people said this. So what I am saying from my standpoint, from my context, because, original ideas, or when we, teach methodology and we try to finalize topics for students' PhD thesis. So there are 2-3 criteria that we, judge the parameters that we have, that either the topic is new, or the methodology is new, the tools maybe are unique, or the region, the context that the person is using is unique, or the sample is unique. So there can be multiple. So you still have enough space to maneuver and find your own USP. So Akanksha, don't worry about that. It's always good to know that, there were people who said this, and you can quote them. Sometimes people don't take those topics where not many people have said anything. So it's always, that's why, human mind and human experiences are so rich. There's no dearth of ideas. So, Akanksha?
Yes, that's why we are still working on Plato's theory.
Yes, we're still dealing, and we keep revisiting these ideas, and we have to interpret them in the changing scenario, in the different formats of democracy, in different formats of institutionalization. So we need to revisit all these ideas. So there's no dearth of ideas. So don't worry about that.
And that too is, a dimension of imagination. You interpret it in your own way. And Absolutely. You revisit it through your own experiences, maybe.
Exactly. Your experience will be unique, Akanksha. As you rightly said that, you might be thinking that your point is unique. And as Alia said, that you can always reimagine it through your standpoint, always. And that will be always unique. That is why we are saying that experiences matter. We can generalize things by understanding multiple experiences. In social sciences, the scientific strength of social sciences is having multiple voices, and every experience matters. We cannot turn them into numbers. It's not just 10 people, 20 people, though we these days statistics and they've taken over the world, but this you cannot take away from the qualitative researches, the things they add, the perspective, the insights that the qualitative researchers give through narratives, through observations, through phenomenology, the experience. Because how I am understanding this dialogue that I'm having with you, this session, will be very different from everybody else's understanding and perception of this experience that we are having. I will be writing, which will be very different from your writing. So, and here also, the strength of dialogue is to understand the phenomenon through multiple perspectives, through the way it appears to people. So a phenomenon is nothing without interpretation, without the interpretation of your experience, without the investigation of your experience. A computer screen is nothing if it doesn't make sense to me, if it doesn't make sense to you. For you, it must be a very different thing. While my interpretation can be very different. A screen, we've had films like She, where the protagonist, he falls in love with the artificial intelligence, and he had developed same emotions. So a machine can be something very different in our interpretation. So the same phenomenon will have multiple interpretations, and that's the beauty and that's the strength of dialogues and the phenomenology, the methods that we have, especially in qualitative researches, to understand. And human rights and democracy, for them, the experiences hold the center stage. They are the core values, because as we say, the last person standing becomes important. So we cannot leave out that person. That's why utilitarian theories were challenged, because they were maximum benefit for maximum people. That's the populist, the popular quote that we understand of utilitarians. But then we realize that no, it's also about capabilities. It is also about exclusion. So here I'll quote John Dewey on the subtle suppression. So he says that the very fact of exclusion is a subtle form of suppression. So sometimes you feel we can, maybe exclude these members or not include. Recently, we had discussions on manels, that people, while deciding panels and panelists, they were not including other genders. So they were being called manels, and people were protesting against it. Why? Representation definitely matters, but it's also a form of suppression. So you're not doing any harm. You're not causing any violence. There is no bloodshed, but there is violence. There is invisible violence. There is structural, systemic violence in it, because exclusion is a form of suppression. And if you're claiming to be a democracy, you cannot afford to do that. And if you're doing it, you will face protests and resistance. So from here, another thing, now, since we're talking about resistance, why the whole idea of dialogue, one very, very important thing that comes out of it is the idea of totalitarianism that we've discussed. Authoritarianism, totalitarianism, or monolithic realities. So challenging monolithic realities in itself is a mission, is a goal of having dialogues, again, to counter prejudice, to protect people, to protect their rights, the right to exist of everybody. We'll move on to, other entities apart from humans, the right to exist. So countering the totalitarian view is the conclusive outcome that we can have out of dialogue. So even Hannah Arendt, of course, was engaging with the idea of totalitarianism a lot. And most of these thinkers, they have talked that, it's a must to have dialogues, at least for, if nothing else, than to counter totalitarianism. And totalitarianism is always a threat. Even if you feel that you have a flourishing democracy, you never know, because a democracy is never consolidated, and thankfully it's never consolidated. It always is dynamic, and it always changes. It can always be, it's malleable. So thankfully it's not concretized and never consolidated, because we have scope in it. But yes, because it is not consolidated and it's not feasible to consolidate it, the threat of totalitarianism is always somewhere above our head. So from here, so if there's anything anybody wants to add to it, because then I'll quickly move to the next part of our, Pragya.
I just wanted to talk about the last point you made about seeing other people experiencing the same thing, making us feel better. Sometimes I think it's reversed. So, when something is happening to you, it's an individual anger. But when you see the same thing as a systemic oppression or a systemic issue, then you have this ocean of anger. Then you're suddenly angry for every. So I feel that about patriarchy. Maybe that I'm, if as long as I saw it only as my problem, I was angry at certain people. But then suddenly I was angry at for everybody, for every woman who has suffered it. So I think that probably also happens. And that's probably what also brings in revolution.
True. Yes, that happens, of course. But that will prevent you from closing yourself or confining yourself to a room. That's the only thing that, you will know that there is a larger problem. You will be able to see the bigger canvas. So you're right, of course. So it has these things happening together. Simultaneously, these things are happening that you feel a little healed, but then you feel so connected that you're disturbed. Right? You feel that wherever you go, you're disturbed. You see the trees, you're disturbed that, tomorrow they won't be here and smart cities will take over. So you are also disturbed, but healed individually. So it's a simultaneous process of grief and grief management. So you're right. That it definitely happens. And if it's not disturbing you, then maybe you need to have more dialogues. It should disturb you. It's always said that, theories and ideas must be uncomfortable. They must disturb you. So if they're not disturbing you, you need to have more discussions to feel a little jolted, right? But at the same time, through discussions, through healing, because that is also one feminist methodology, if you want to call it feminist or you want to call it a more subjective methodology, which leads to objective conclusions, where experience sharing is considered one of the best methods, both, as you said, to understand your own reality as well as the larger reality. So connecting the micro to the macro through, of course, the meso, where people in the middle who are not very sure, but they know about it, not very sure. So, but the perception of, which we call as the political psychology of fear, that affects everybody. People will say that nothing happened with you on the streets. Why are you worried? But the fear that something might happen and something has happened with others, that will stop me from, let's say, going out on the street at night. That will stop me from taking a particular transportation. So the political psychology of fear. So when we are more aware of it, sometimes it also leads to fear. You're right that you get angry. Sometimes you also are afraid. Sometimes when you know that we have a totalitarian organization, people will tell you not to speak a lot. You might be the next target. So all these things are there, but at least you feel better about yourself, that you're aware. You know it, even if you are disturbed, but you know it. You are in a better position to deal with it when it happens than others who are completely ignorant and who don't know about it. So you can always find better solutions. So as Michael Sandel says, the philosopher, and others also, they say that skepticism can be a temporary abode, but not a permanent settlement. So skepticism, we have to be skeptical, but temporarily till we find a better solution. And we never have final solutions. We always have better solutions. So on that note, we'll start with the skepticism of feminists regarding the human rights which were being discussed. So earlier there were liberal feminists who were more reformist in nature and approach. So they went along with the idea of liberal democracy, and they felt that things will improve if the idea of sameness is applied for all. And it was a conducive idea for liberal democracies as well, and the way they were being established and laid for everybody. So the idea of sameness initially was considered for all, but then gradually people started realizing that the idea of sameness is leading to exclusion. it's not leading to inclusion. It's not including everybody, or at least people on the margins and the peripheries. So do you feel that sameness, the idea of sameness, will lead to justice and equality, or it can be exclusive? That same rules are applied, same things are given, same set of conditions are there. So the idea of same.
I think the conditions and the rules have different meanings for different people. I think if you apply the same rules, if you have the same rules for a set of people, then some of the people are not going to realize that they are not to step on other people's space. A few of them would realize and adhere to that, but I think most wouldn't be able to. Like a lot of people will say that if I can beat you, then I can beat you. Because I am powerful, because I am able to do it. And that doesn't stop me from doing it. That's the problem with a lot of people. If they think that they can get away with it, they will do it. But it's not within their right to hit anybody, but they'll still do it. So if you have the same principles, we need to have at least a basic minimum of, of education or experience or, something for that group that binds them in some way. There has to be a basic minimum there as well before you decide to have the same rules for the people. Like in India, everybody can vote, but a few people will vote for 500 rupees for if they get 500 rupees in 5 years. But a lot of us won't do that. And on the other hand, a lot of people who feel really privileged will say that if there is no nota, then I'm not going to vote. Or if I do go, I'm going to vote nota. So it's these kinds of things that make me feel that we can't have the same rules for everybody if we don't have the same experiences for everybody.
True. Absolutely. If you don't have same experience for everybody, you cannot have same rules for everybody. So as you talked about voting, so of course, we have different classes of people. We have different castes, particularly in India, who vote very differently, who have a very different understanding of the electorate system. So, or maybe no understanding. Some people also see it as a festival, but there's also one concern that, as you said, that everybody can vote in India, right? That's constitutionally, legally, everybody has the right to vote. But migrants, what about them? When a person from Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, let's say, goes to Bombay for work, do you think they're registered there as voters, most of them, or they come back to their place of origin to vote, or their votes are not?
I don't think that they feel their vote counts towards anything. Because I was in Bihar recently. My husband's family is from Bihar, and they had, the elections for the mayor, for the councillor, this, that. And people weren't really concerned about what those people offered. They thought that more or less everybody had the same things to offer. So they wanted to vote for the one who was going to win. Right. And if that person didn't win in the end, they felt that their vote was wasted.
Right. So that also happens. And another thing, there was a paper, a few researchers had done a longitudinal study, and they came up with very interesting facts and very unfortunate facts too, that most of the migrants and all the politicians know that they're not registered. A few of them, they register, but they're not very sure that they're going to stay in one place forever or for a long time. So they don't register. So mostly they're registered in their place of origin. And by the time, and if they don't vote, so sometimes their names are not in the list anymore. So they're nowhere. So there's
it's a struggle for them to even find their name there. And then then the officers there realize that they can't really read, they can't really find out, because they'll give you the list. If you ask them where your name is, they'll just give you the list and you have to find your own name. And a lot of people can't do that. I feel that I've seen both things happen. A lot of people don't care whether they vote, or they want to vote for the one who's going to win. And on the other hand, I've seen people who will spend all the money they have to go and vote just because they stand for something. So, and it's just so sad either way. It's really sad.
Right. So, but the perception is for the politicians. So these researchers, they were, sending posts and mailing all the local leaders. And then they realized when they were, telling that they are the locals, those leaders were responding to their calls and their grievances. So the majority of the responses came for the locals and not for the migrants. So they have this perception that migrant population either doesn't care or they're not registered, so they are not our voters. So this population is not considered important. So for them, if we say that we need more welfare programs, we need the rights of the migrants, but another problem is that the wage market is set by the migrant population and not by the locals, because it's very difficult for them to negotiate at the local level. So they end up agreeing at the bare minimum. So then people realize that, that they have to be mobilized and they have to be included, but it is not happening at the higher echelons where people need to consider that these people exist. So their existence, it doesn't matter to the people who are setting the rules and the policies for them. At a lower level, of course, sometimes there is mobilization where some activists, some groups get together and they try to educate them on industrial laws and labor rights. So this happens, but then it's not getting translated really into policies. And we're seeing in the recent past that most of the policies are also overnight. They're being destroyed, whatever was there. So democracy is a very fragile idea. All of us understand that, and it needs to be revisited and talked about on a daily basis, and in our everyday life and activity. It has to be, we have to exude the idea of democracy. So this was happening when people started realizing, especially when we're talking about human rights, when people saw that, the larger idea of rights is good. It sounds good and it's inclusive. It's talking about individual autonomy. It's talking about liberty. It's a good idea. But then in their everyday lives, people realized, and especially women and gradually other genders were included, they realized that it's not reaping benefits in their everyday life and their personal experiences. So this idea is there, which is good, sounds good, and sounds conducive and a very healthy idea to live by. But then it is not affecting their lives. Their lives are untouched and they remain where they were. So then people started critiquing the idea of androcentric human rights, so that human rights were being translated through elite educated males initially, because most of the rights, as we also see that some philosophers like Locke and there was the idea that people who own property, they are the rational beings. So women, migrants, low-wage laborers, slaves, they were not considered rational people. And if you're not rational, you can't have citizenship rights. So the basic idea, the tenet of rationality was being understood through the lens of elite male educated section of the population. So the human rights which we want to embrace, they've had a very checkered past. So how these ideas were being challenged in people's everyday lives, then we realize that there were feminists who were saying that, reforms are needed and reforms were welcomed also. And the centrality of state was also considered that, for welfare, we need this sort of a liberal democracy where state plays a role, though we see that the role is shrinking and, more and more privatization is happening. So the idea of the scope of affirmative action is decreasing, and some people are also asking to extend the scope of affirmative action to the private sectors as well. So when these things were happening, and when some conventions, some summits started happening, and they started considering that, the idea of sameness is not working for everybody. The idea of unique experience has to be considered, because sameness is excluding people. When you are having set parameters, and if you have decided that this is called rationality and this is how rational beings look like, then you have already excluded them. Muhammad is sleeping.
Oh no, ma'am, I'm listening.
Okay, okay, fine. Yeah, no, I understand. So yeah, fine. Mohammed, wake up, please.
His vote counts towards something already, so he can do with the siesta.
Okay, Mohammed. Fine. So these were the things. But then another argument came again from, within the feminist strands, that then we are again, when we are saying that state can rescue us, then we are again associating the masculinist, traditional, patriarchal state which is going to rescue women. So what's your take on that? That this, contestation between the thinkers and the activists, that, what to do? Should we make state the primary doer and having the main agency? Or we can have something else? Because when we are saying the state has to do it, the state has to, then we're also seeing the state as the rescuer. So, and we are implying that there has to be somebody who's going to rescue women and other marginalized identities. So what's your take on that? Anybody?
Can that question be repeated?
Yeah, Kulsum. Okay, so we are saying that one group of women, they were saying that, the state has to play an important role, and we need to have a welfare state, and the state has to do things for women. So constantly we're asking for things. Constantly we are telling that, women have to be rescued, something has to be done for them. So their agency is not considered as much as the agency of the state. So state will always be in that role of the traditional, let's say, patriarch who's going to take decisions, who's going to do things. So this another set of thinkers, they felt that there's some problem with this idea. So that's the question. So do you think there is a problem with this idea, or there shouldn't be any bone of contention here?
I think there's definitely some truth in this idea, because a lot of the power that we give, we've given a certain amount of power to the state, and they have, all the sort of resources to make laws and policies and pass them out. And that will definitely maybe bring about change in a wider way, as it were. But oftentimes when you start with change that comes from real change, it takes a lot of time, and it comes from the ground level. And often at the ground level, you don't see the state, but rather these sort of individual collectives like NGOs and maybe, other small groups that people have formed up, and they're just sort of trying to bring about changes themselves. And then that change is always more effective. So there's definitely something to be said for that.
Right. So you're right. So the next step was in the process of dialogue, then as you correctly said, people came up with this idea that activism might help. So when we have these two ideas of universalism and particularism, so universal and particular, how to bridge this gap? So people felt that it's very difficult at the ideational level to bridge the gap because universals won't be acceptable to all and particular can't be generalized for all. So what to do? So now people came up with this idea that maybe activism is the answer to it. Now, what's your take on that?
No, before we get to that, if women didn't even have the right to vote before that. So why would the state want to do anything for them?
Right.
So the state is made up of men, and the women don't have a say in how any committee or council is formed.
Absolutely.
Or and who's going to be a member of it.
True. So the first wave feminists, they had to fight for civil and political rights. They didn't have, because they were not considered rational beings. As in many places, rationality was identified with ownership of property. So how will you be rational when you don't have other rights? So people wanted initially, at least claim some property rights and voting rights. To be counted as rational beings. You're very right. That why would people even imagine in the wildest of imaginations they won't count you? Because you don't matter. You're nothing. You're not a rational being. You are bone and flesh and blood, maybe at the max. So extension of the cultural systems and till date, in most places, women are considered as extensions of their male counterparts, extensions of families, extensions of cultural systems. Why? It's a very good point that you've raised, because we have to come to culture as well. And we have talked about it earlier, multiculturalism. So there are thinkers who feel that, is multiculturalism bad for women or multiculturalism is good for women? The same idea.
You said reminds me of the same rules thing that you said a while ago. And it reminded me of bell hooks too. That when the women finally got the right to vote, Black women weren't included in that lot. Yeah, so that too. Okay.
So for Black women, yes, that's when the idea of intersectionality came in. That you have to fight on two fronts, race and gender. And then, of course, there are many other things, class and many other identities, education, which we call as primordial, and then social.
And you have to fight Black men too.
That exactly. So there are many cases which are cited where a Black judge and there is a Black, let's say the person who is alleged of something, and there's a lawyer. So the Black judge is giving judgment against the woman even when everything is so clearly evident. So these cases made people realize that this is not working for women within cultural groups. So then women started talking about, different cultural identities and different identities within the group. Then not just of women, but many other identities that existed, or the group claimed or co-opted those identities. So those were being discussed. Now we come to this idea of culture. So culture is a static thing, or it's a dynamic thing, according to you? Or what would you like it to be?
I'd say it's definitely a dynamic thing, because not only is it changing it in itself, it's also sort of constantly breaking down and forming subcultures, and there's a lot of overlap of identities happening. Like we were speaking of feminism and all of this. I think overall, when we look at it in history, marginalized group, whether they're women, whether they're a particular race, like maybe African Americans, maybe it's LGBTQ people, they have never really, it has taken them very long to find justice through lawmaking. And then their change always begins at like a more, they have to achieve systemic change themselves, and it's not always through the law. So And when we think of things like feminism, it has all these waves of feminism, and even now intersectionality has to come in, and now there's this sort of rising idea of how feminism, which is essentially a debate about gender and all of this, there's so much at play within it. Things like nationality, like race, all of these things overlap. And the idea is that white feminism has kind of taken over, and it doesn't really take into account a lot of these marginalized identities, and even doesn't take into account men from marginalized communities, and how they have suffered at the hands of certain feminist theories, so to speak.
Right.
So it's sorry.
No, please, if you finish.
That was pretty much it.
Right, you're right that within when we're talking about culture, it's not just the ethnographic idea of culture, but now the ethnography has moved to even corporate houses. So that is also counted as culture. So we have moved beyond the village setup or the things that we used to think that, when anthropologists go and research, they go to the interiors and they stay there. And now the idea of ethnography has moved beyond that. And now we have moved on to the urban spaces as well, or within certain groups, as you said, that within the feminist groups or the groups which were talking about social exclusion, so the culture that they are developing. When we're talking about men, actually men were included now in the popular understanding that we have, because men, when women realized, and it was a struggle, you're right, that it was a big struggle. Katie King explains it very nicely in one of her essays, that it was a huge struggle because women were feeling that, their identity and their things are at stake, and how to include others, even other genders, it was very difficult. So there was a huge discussion and a long debate and altercations, bad feelings as well, heartbreaks. But they did come to this conclusion that men who are facing violence, men who claim other identities in terms of their sexualities, who are, visibly they look like men, but they claim other identities. So these groups have to be included. So anybody who is facing violence, segregation, discrimination has to be included. So there was a point when people came to this, at least a section of feminists, they came to this conclusion that these people have to be included. Though in popular perception, we've lost that, and we hardly talk about it, because now what has started happening, especially in India, I can say that, a men's commission and all that has started happening. So what happens is, the thing that we're seeing in democracy, which we'll see here, that, the way democracy recedes, all the ideas that and the ideals that we've achieved, they also start receding. They also start taking a step back, and they also, as we say that, we need to, because I keep repeating, these are fragile ideas which have to be discussed on a daily basis to be able to deal with them and come up with better solutions for all. Because, and another thing, inclusion, the idea of inclusion is justice, or inclusion can be without justice? We say that things have to be inclusive.
As an Indian who identifies as a Muslim and as a woman, I feel really, really included and excluded by feminists in India, I must say. This is what comes to mind when you ask whether. So inclusion has to come with justice. Otherwise, you're just going to say that I've had enough. I don't want to be a part of this anymore.
Right. So in human rights, also people were discussing this idea that inclusion is enough, or because it can also lead to tokenism. it might not really lead to substantive justice. It might change the laws also, but still it might not have substantive justice if it's not translated in people's everyday lives and responses. So it can lead to tokenism. For example, as you said that, are you claiming to be, is it right to say that a Muslim woman?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So as a Muslim woman, you feel that, this idea of inclusion, when you say you don't feel attached to this idea of inclusion as much, you would like it to be. So it's true that if it's not coming with the idea of substantive justice, so just including, calling you for, discussions, or only, representing you or using you as a representative of community will never give you that solace. Would never give anybody that solace with any identity, because then you feel that, then you feel exploited further. Then you feel that, why were you there? This is not the cause that you were actually struggling for. So that happens with many people, and that was happening in these discussions also. People felt included and excluded at the same time, included and marginalized, included and invisible. So you can do that. You can include and make people invisible by including them. Then,
so what I was specifically referring to was including somebody and trying to speak for them. So if you're trying to include somebody, then you just let them speak for themselves.
Let them speak.
That's what I had in mind when I said that.
True.
Ma'am, I was working in ETV as senior copy editor in Hyderabad. So in News 18, they are running at least 18 news channels in different languages. Mm-hmm. So mostly I heard like some Hindi and English editors. They were saying like in Urdu desk, about Urdu desk, okay, acha Pakistani on a desk. So that time I feel like we are excluded of that particular channels, or like they are saying like we are working with Urdu channel, so they are thinking like we come from Pakistan. So these kind of,
Yes, you're right. So the language you're using, the jokes that you're using, if you counter, they'll say that, oh, we were just joking, we were just trying to, use the stereotypes and have fun. But exactly. Jokes are not, the jokes are political, we all know. And by now, everybody understands that jokes have their own politics. Jokes are
now political. They're not even funny anymore.
They're not funny, and they can't be funny at anybody's cost. That's not a joke. That's plain torture. You cannot have fun at anybody's cost. So these are not jokes.
Like they say, if everybody is not laughing, it's not a joke.
Yes, of course, it can't be, and at anybody's cost. And even for the, the artists, the stage performers, it's always said that you cannot, hit below. You cannot do that. You cannot, joke about the identities. You cannot joke about people who are already struggling to be in that space. You cannot do that. That's not ethical. So those you can totally understand that, okay, this artist and that artist, that's, you can see the difference, the kind of jokes or the kind of satire one is building and the kind of satire the other is building. You can completely, if you have this minimum sense of discretion and discernment, you can immediately identify that, okay, this person is not of this league, because you will not joke about people who are already struggling with things and who don't have, or who you haven't given, or you haven't made space for certain identities. You definitely cannot joke about them. Across genders, across classes, castes, religious communities, cultures, nationalities, you cannot. So these are the things that jokes are very political, right? Can you give me one example of how jokes are political and very subtle politics, but very aggressive at the same time?
I heard one just recently, and it said something like, "Why are Americans really good at Rubik's cubes?" And they said, "Oh, that's because they've always been good at separating colors."
Oh,
Something like that.
right. See? Oh gosh, absolutely. So these are the things. So these were the dialogues that were happening at this level also. And even when we had certain, for example, certain UN committees were made on the status of women, but we still didn't have any convention of sorts to actually identify the ground experiences that were happening. Then they came up with CEDAW to challenge discrimination against women, all sorts of discriminations, because people believed that before CEDAW came, before this convention came, until date we talk about these ideas of public and private. The division that we have of public and private, initially when people were talking about human rights, they had made these clear divisions of public and private, that state or any law or any legal system is not going to touch the private sphere, and they will stay and work in the public sphere. So this was seen as a problem, especially for women, because the division of labor was such that one entire section of the population will not come under any legal protection. So then it was challenged that no, this is problematic, and these rights, when these things are violated or people are discriminated against and exploited in the public, in the private sphere, they have nowhere to go, nowhere to express their grievance. So then it was challenged. So for the first time in CEDAW in 1979, it was acknowledged that, the things that are happening in the private sphere are equally important, and the state has to take cognizance of the things that are happening in the private sphere. And later, further, it was included, further ideas were included in the declaration later. Earlier, even the idea of family, they were not saying families in most of the declarations. They were just saying family, and which was heteronormative, the heterosexual families, for male and female. So the whole idea, the language that was used was not in the people were not in the imagination of the policymakers and the legal experts and the people who were having a dialogue regarding human rights. So human rights as an idea initially was not including these people, because you can see that there are many places where they don't even count. They say that discrimination against race, religion, they don't use, till very late, they were not using the word gender or sex. Later, after discussions, in some places, they started using sexual orientation. They were still not counting women's experiences as such, in the detail, as they were having the experiences on the ground at the grassroots level. So in the vocabulary itself, you can see, and the way these articles were framed, you will see that you don't have that language. And if you don't have that language, it won't be part of your imagination. It won't be part of discussion. So first, the problem was to include, the struggle was to include these ideas so that you can build, a legal structure around it. But we find that in most of these, first of all, the public-private division, it was quite artificial, and the state was kept out of it. And then later we were seeing that what was happening to liberal democracy, when the idea of, the open market, when this came, then the private space, now I'm throwing this idea at you. So there were two groups who were interpreting this change very differently. So one group was saying that the private sphere is being increased because now the state doesn't want to touch the market as well as the family, right? So market, so family plus market, the private sphere has increased where state intervention is not required. The other set was saying that no, market actually needs the state. So now the state has started interfering and has increased surveillance, even inside your homes. So what is your interpretation, that actually the private sphere has increased, or the boundaries are blurred and state is everywhere, or you're feeling that the state has been relegated to a small public sphere?
In feminist theory, they say this thing, the personal is political. So that is the one thing that I think really answers it, because you can really have an individual life and, you say that maybe the government doesn't do what you want or does do what you want. But at every level, there is some intervention of the state. And your way of life is dictated by that. Even if you choose to not look at it that way, but then even in the most sort of small intricacies of everyday life, laws and everything do affect that sort of thing.
Okay. Right. So you feel that state intervention has increased? For good or for good, like for people's welfare? Not for good, like not forever, but for the betterment of people, or state intervention has increased to exploit or to deter people from expressing their rights and concerns?
I think the one thing that state intervention has, really the major change that has come after the sort of recent increase in state intervention is that society is a lot more fragmented. And while that means that a lot of people maybe have a more distinct identity now, it has also led to a sort of sense of alienation, which is what a lot of communities are feeling. So that might be women, that might be, indigenous communities who feel that, like you said, it comes back to that thing of inclusion and justice. They're included, people are talking about them and there's all that, but are they actually on a level of inclusion where they have a say in what affects them? That is different.
Right.
And one thing that I think is really interesting is how when you think of including a marginalized community, you kind of just take a few people that fit a certain maybe criteria, and then you have them stand in as as the representative of an entire very diverse group.
Yes.
And
that is one very important point, that sometimes that was also one idea which was contested when people were saying that state has to be there for everything, which is fine, but then there has to be an investigation. When we say that state is giving representation, state is making policies, why are you not letting the state function properly? But what happens is state sometimes identifies people who are aligned with that ideology or who are aligned with that structure, who won't cause too much trouble and who won't question a lot, who won't talk about the rest of the people. As popularly it's said that aapka kya ja raha hai? बाकियों का घर जल भी रहा है तो आपका क्या हो रहा है? आप चुपचाप अपनी सैलरी लीजिए और आराम से जाइए. Or and then they can also, so there are two ways. One, the state can reward you, state can punish you. Both ways are used. एक से नहीं काम चलेगा तो दूसरे से काम चलेगा. So of course, state, we also need to see the kind of representation that is being given. It's not enough if we don't investigate it and again have a dialogue with that kind of representation. Because again, as you said, that those people across identities, they might be aligned with a particular ideology and particular structure, which might not be causing any friction and which would be very favorable to that structure. Yes, Akanksha, you were saying something.
Can I just say one more thing before Akanksha does?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Akanksha. But the interesting thing that you can also see is that when it comes to marginalized groups, representing their group also becomes a thing of privilege. because there is no room for mediocrity when you're a marginalized person. You have to be outstanding, and you have to be outstanding in a particular way to be allowed into the room.
Right.
Like
True.
giving justice.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said it, because we see that happening a lot in affirmative action. That, there are so many, quotas, so many places where people claim to be giving representation, but all are vacant. And they say that they're not finding, good enough people, that they're not meeting the standards. So sometimes what happens, even when you're very smart and you're outsmarting everybody else and you're an outstanding person, still you have to keep bettering yourself just to, prove the point and at least claim that little space that might be given to you by fluke at times. So for that fluke also, you have to remain the best. So that's a huge pressure. That's a pressure.
And the argument for, I'm sorry if I cut you off, but the argument for affirmative action is always that, it's taking away opportunities from people who could do so much better. But then when you think about it, the ground level for those people was never the same. There's one community that's starting from maybe whatever you call sea level. And then there's another community that was so deep down below that they need that action to pull them up and, be on the same starting point. So it's very important that way.
The struggle is double, triple, as you said, first at the starting point and then all along.
Throughout your life, yes.
Throughout your life.
For sure.
Right. Akanksha.
Yeah, actually, you just made that point. I was wanted to say about this representationalism. Like, it's not only enough to just be there, but we need to work on that also, and we need to make room also. So it's all I wanted to share. And second thing, as Kulsum said about this, we need to maintain that level, the starting point. So some are coming from the more marginalized or like whatever you can say. So is one thing I just want to share a quick, my own experience. So as I struggle a lot to reach up to this level. So people sometimes, just appreciate, okay, you made this, you did this, but that was not all like my fault or my background fault, but that was the state. We didn't have any schools nearby to me, so I need to go to 20 kilometers to, early in the morning, and then I'm coming back late in the evening. So it's just not what I made it is from my own will, but there is this state is not doing their work also, and appreciating or this women. We had one boys' school that was only boys' school, and that was not even unisex school. So all that were happening this, and there were no nothing were coming from the state. So what we did, we made this protest to open this school. That was the government school, GGIC. I studied there, and that were logged. The school was there, but that were logged. So we made this protest. We were, I think I was in 8th or 9th. We when this started. So yeah, sometimes we need to initiate also, because state is not going to do everything for you, but we need to take initiative as well. And this alienation of particularism to individualism, this cross-cultural studies. So I think in both the levels we need to do work. So that's all I wanted to say.
True, and this point that you made is very important. It will just extend our argument, which we were having, that when people say and appreciate, still it doesn't satisfy you because they don't understand the depth and the detail of that struggle and the detail of the effort, even if we don't want to call it struggle, the effort that went into it. They just feel that yes, something happened and you did it, and it's a heroic act. But the thing behind it, it's very difficult to even express in words. it only comes across sometimes when, in deep down in your memory lane, something you're able to remember and maybe point out, then people might think, oh, was that deep a struggle? And it doesn't happen in our everyday conversations. In our everyday conversations, sometimes we also forget half the things that we have done, or half the things that, we couldn't do because of certain situation and circumstances. So how to document struggle can be another session, because we are challenged by our memory, the memory of the collective and the individual again. So we can have another session on how to document these efforts which get lost in the meta narrative of heroism, or the meta narrative of overcoming and defying the structures. So in these meta narratives, sometimes these experiences and stories and the details, they get lost, and which are extremely important for the idea of democracy, the essence of democracy and rights, and for affirmative actions. That's why we're seeing that most of our affirmative actions, they're not working for most of the people. Caveat, we're not saying that we don't want these actions. We want them to be in place, but maybe a little more understanding of people's experience is required, which is not reflected in our policies, in our public policies that are being formulated. Because still till date, though we have advanced to this level, but most of our public policies, they are dated. They haven't really updated themselves, and the policy makers, they haven't really had this discussion, which we can call as deliberative democracy. But then again, deliberative democracy has its own limitations, as some of our thinkers have pointed out. The limitations of deliberative democracy. Though from here, I'll just quickly take you. How much time do we have? Okay, we don't have much time. So yeah, so one thing which will also connect, so we won't get into the detail of ecological democracy, because we have brought in most of these points. Only one point from there I'll speak about. But here, since we are seeing that there were deliberations going on, there were discussions going on regarding human rights and documentation of experiences, and what are the things that have to be included, and what are the factors that are being ignored. So some people felt that the indivisibility of structure, like all the structures, economic structure, political structure, cultural, the entire, the gamut has to be addressed and seen, because it's indivisible. And rights can only be understood when we put these things together and meshed, and then we try to see things through that, the rays that are coming out of that structure. So this was one consensus that people arrived at, that, the tightness of the structure defines our rights. And all these together, one, we cannot say that, if there is economic advancement, we can achieve something, or if, as we say, cultural lag, that technology has advanced, but our value system hasn't advanced. So if the value system matches the technology, then we'll achieve something. Or if we get a better political regime, then we'll achieve something. No, it doesn't happen. So this was understood that for understanding and for having actual, actualizing these rights, we need to address these things which are working in tandem. So if you want to, maybe some of you have read Wendy Brown. If you want to read Wendy Brown, you can read her book on the ruins of neoliberalism, where she points out very clearly how culture, state, and market, they work in tandem, and we are struggling with only the idea of maybe capitalism, or maybe the idea of androcentrism or anthropocentrism, while things are happening together and we are lost. So we are not even able to locate the problem correctly. How are we going to, get to a better solution? So most importantly, we need to locate the problem correctly. And for that, again, dialogue is the only way out. As we've seen that for human rights, which sounded like a very non-lethal, a very good idea, but there was so much struggle going on, and there were so many details which were being ignored. And then later people realized that no, it's not one thing or the other, or one thing is not just contingent on the other, but it is happening in tandem and it has to be addressed together. But it's another big challenge, that how to address everything together. So that's again, an ongoing discussion and deliberation, that how to address the entire structure together, because structures are always stronger than individuals. So how to deal with that? So then why we are still having liberal democracy? This is the answer. Because state still has, we need to use the state. We need to, make the state accountable. We need to make the state answerable. And we need to work with the state, because state becomes a big connect between the, the micro and the macro. It has the power, as you said, it has the might, it has the facilities, which smaller groups might not have. But at the same time, as Chantal Mouffe, who talks about, going beyond deliberative democracy, she talks about agnostic pluralism. So people then came to this conclusion, and this stands true for, human rights. This stands true for ecological rights, ecological citizens, that agnostic pluralism can be a way out, where you are not just moralizing, where you're not just saying that you're including, but you are accepting that there will be, contestations, there will be differences, there will be challenges. It's not that all the identities who feel, that they are marginalized will actually come together and will form solidarities. So with that acknowledgement that there will be differences, there will be contentions, there will be challenges, but we are always still trying to look for better solutions with the subjectivities intact of the individuals, of the communities, along with the experiences that they are expressing. So that is the whole idea of agnostic pluralism. For ecological democracy also, it started with environmentalism. Both the ideas were happening, parallelly. The way human rights were being engaged with the idea of democracy, similarly, environmentalism. So they also felt that, liberal democracy is the way out. And then they challenged it, and people realized that environmentalism is actually only, trying to talk about the loss that humans are suffering, and not about the actual rights and right to exist of other beings, the non-human beings or entities that are existing. So initially, there was another reading I had given, apart from this that I mentioned right now. So if you see, there's a table in it, and I'll just read it out. So initially, environmental democracy was anthropocentric. It was human-centric, that, humans are suffering. These gases are there, ozone layer is depleting. So it's about human suffering. And it was a friendly critique of liberal democracy. It was not a foundational or fundamental critique. Again, it was reformist in nature, the way the initial the human rights struggle was reformist in nature. And it believed in reconciliation, that you can have globalization along with the local groups, and you can have globalization your way, which sometimes still many of the thinkers, they feel, and civil society can be an active partner in it. But then we realized that there was another group of people who believed that the idea of materialism has to be taken very seriously, and the material resources have to be reshuffled, and it's not that you just stir in something and keep it there. which even the human rights people felt that, in the idea of development, women were just being put, and they were, there's a quote that, you put sex and stir it in the same system. So they're just there in the same system, revolving within the system without any change. So they're just the same entity. They're having the same, at the same situation with the same circumstances. It's just that they're there somewhere. So similar was the case with environmentalism and with ecological democracy, because then ecology, along with humans, non-humans, rivers, water bodies, mountains, trees, all the other entities, the non-human nature was also being taken into account. And many countries, they came up with laws where they conferred personhood on the non-human nature, and they call them entities, and they gave them the right to exist. We have seen that in New Zealand, we see that Wanganui River, how it was saved by the Maori tribe. And during the colonial period, the tribes had lost their right over Wanganui, which they had also, they called it sacred, and they had sentimental attachment to it. So the liability was also, conferred on them, that this group has the liability to save it and to keep it clean and to keep it running. So this is how in India people tried to do, once the judges tried to do the same with Ganga, but then it was so difficult to decide the liability, whether it's going to be a bureaucrat or some commission or a group of people. So then nothing happened, and it was back to square one. But these attempts are being made, and it's a step towards ecological democracy. There was one point where it was also called that extreme materialism, where people felt that, again, the institutionalized democracies, the democracy in its institutionalized form doesn't work, because either it's very slow, it has too much bureaucratic concerns, and it alienates the ordinary citizens. And again, the people who are the representatives of certain parties, certain groups, certain institutions, they have a say. And the ordinary people are not able to reach out to those people, so their word is not being spread. And hence, the institutionalized democracy is not working for the ordinary people. There was this one section, but then people, again, they fell back to the same thing, that, we are left with the liberal democracy, and that's the way out, at least for the time being. And but democracy always has to be reinterpreted. As we say, that there are two forms and two aspects of democracy. One is the philosophical, the essence of democracy, which we've been discussing, of expanding and of justice, of inclusion with substantive justice and substantive democratic experiences. Then there is another aspect of democracy, which is about the technique of democracy, the technique of decision making. So that technique can always be worked on, and that technique can always be improved. So I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tarushikha. It was really nice, really articulate, perceptive, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And everybody has so much to take home and think about, and I think for days to come, because we touched so many topics. We're going to, whenever we're thinking of something, we're going to think of this session with you. There's no doubt about it. And we'd love to have you with us again. Thank you for taking time out for us.
It was a really insightful session. I think everybody, it was nice to see everybody.
So Kulsum is also in Aligarh, Tarushikha. So if both of you want to connect, Kulsum is in Aligarh.
Oh, yeah. Of course, we have to. Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
So, and whenever I'm also in Aligarh, I'm going to just invite myself over.
Please do come.
Most welcome, always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And it was quite enriching for me, because many things you were mentioning, which were left out in most of the theories. And as we say that, the silencing of archives and silencing of theories. So thank you so much for contributing equally. So it was actually participatory. Can we say that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pleasure. Yeah, our pleasure to be able to interact with you. And thank you. We'll end it here.
To all of you, Behzad, where is he?
He's here and he sends his regards and he thanks you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it feels so, personal connecting with all of you despite this screen and the virtual platform. But thank you so much. Thank you.